Another episode of the ISO on the Gonzaga Nation Media Network. Dan Dickau here is your host. Today's guest, one of the college basketball insiders that you must follow on social media or on CBSSports.com, Matt Norlander. Matt, thanks for joining.
It's a pleasure to be joining with no lie, one of my favorite college players of the 2000s. So thank you, Dan, for having me on.
Absolutely. Kind of dating myself and saying that 2000s, but it's true. You know, you look back so many years later, and now I'm in a position where I'm calling games. You're covering the sport inside and out. How did you get into covering college basketball and some other guys for different networks are as connected as can be?
So nutshell version is CBS since 2010. I went to a Division III university out in Connecticut called Western Connecticut State University and majored in journalism there. And in 2007, which is a generation ago, really, blogs were a humongous thing on the internet then. Twitter, I think, was technically invented or started in 2006, but it didn't really start to find any sort of legitimate legs until 2010. So anyway, a lot of sports writing was either done in traditional outlets or independently made blogs. So I started my own college basketball website called College Hoops Journal, which grew to be a pretty well-read independent site. And then through that, I got hired part-time to write at Yahoo. I was also a sports editor of a couple weekly newspapers here in Connecticut. I was doing a whole bunch of stuff, like 2008 through 2010. And then eventually, I think because of how much I was covering college basketball as like a independent writer, CBS started to expand its writer stable. Gary Parrish was the only college basketball writer at CBSSports.com in 2010. And he was like a traditional columnist then. And they wanted to bring on a team of 3 or 4 more writers. So they tapped me first for that. And, I've been with the company basically a dozen years now, and, roles have expanded and changed over the years. And yeah, where I was once basically, the nature of blogging, it's just I was writing every kind of small little something that you might dedicate 2 or 3 tweets to in 2022. I would dedicate 250 words to in a blog post in 2010, 2011. And then that kind of version of the internet started to dissolve away, and did more feature writing and did plenty more reporting. And now we do a podcast that we do 3 times a week and do TV work and all that kind of stuff. So that's basically it in a nutshell. But I've always loved college basketball. Has always been my favorite sport. So I'm very happy, enthusiastic, and hopefully forever will be to get to cover this sport, because it's basically like college hoops 1, NFL 1A. Those are my 2 favorite. I love all sorts of kinds of sports. I've been enjoying the US Open. I certainly get into college football, enjoy the NBA, love covering and writing about the Olympics for CBS. But by far my 2 favorites are college hoops and the NFL. And to be able to kind of be a fan of one, but then full-fledged, objective professional about the other is a cool little gig there. And so, yeah, here we are on the precipice of yet another season. In fact, as we're talking here, I guess we're 2 months out exactly from the first night of games in the 22-23 campaign.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, I'm starting my early prep, at least for the WCC. I'll get into the Pac-12 and Mountain West stuff probably in the next couple of weeks. But when you go from an independent, and there's lots of really good independent guys out there now. I follow them on Twitter to help me with my prep. But when you go from independent to now aligned with a company like CBS, do coaches take your phone call quicker now when you're at CBS than they did before? How does that kind of respect in the industry change, or how did it maybe change?
It changed. It's certainly a little bit early on. I wasn't when I was doing the independent stuff. I wasn't actively seeking to make connections with a lot of coaches. There were like a couple that maybe I'd made contact with, like basically over email, like almost cold emailing them from what their email was on their site. And they were, that was mid-major coaches. It certainly does help. I will say, and I've mentioned this before plenty of times in radio interviews or on the podcast or whatever. One of the things I love about college basketball, and I base this opinion going off of what other writers and other sports have told me, there is no major American team sport that has a a more open line of communication between its media and its head coaches than men's college basketball. In football, it's way different. Now, there are some reporters, obviously, who have good relationships with college football coaches, but that group, it tends to be much more paranoid, closed off, not as available, tougher to get to, many more walls to climb. NFL, forget about it, right? Professional sports. It's not that those lines aren't there with the media and the coaches, they are, but in college basketball, it's extremely free flowing. And part of that is because so many of the coaches, either assistants, want to move up. They understand that if they make themselves available to the media, that usually can only be a good thing. While the media, I do think college basketball media does a good job, could always be better, of holding coaches accountable. There's a job to be done here. The nature of having so many schools, 360, we're at 363 Division I schools this season. There's too many in D1. That's a whole other deal altogether. But you have so many coaches at smaller institutions, and there's always a fight to get your team. If you're not one of 15 to 20 schools, like getting your team to get written about, talked about, it's tough. So one way to help with that is to be a kind of a coach that gets it. If a media person happens to reach out to want to talk on record, off record, that certainly helps. So yes, being at a major media company absolutely helps. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but I will give coaches credit for the most part, not all coaches, but most. There are still some sitting head coaches who I think might be a little too stodgy on when it comes to this, but college basketball coaches, they are not going to discriminate too heavily, particularly now in 2022, against a media person if they have, if they're in it and their motivations are proper. If you're an independent reporter, writer, podcaster, there's a chance. It depends. Like, for example, I know we'll stick with Gonzaga here for a second. Like if there's a dedicated podcast, and I know there are there are multiple to Gonzaga basketball. If you're if you're covering it legitimately, responsibly, like it's not unthinkable that you might be able to get Mark on the horn. I think, Dan, you can probably get Mark, but I'm talking about like general podcasters or writers or any of the assistants, right? They're all reachable in their own ways, and they should want to be, because they want to talk about their program, get it more out there. Gonzaga is almost, as you well know, its entire situation is different from any other program in the country because of the nature of how good the program is and the league that it plays in, plus where it is geographically. Gonzaga is a fascinating program overall, and it's incredible that Mark's been able to do what he's been able to do there. So I've been a little long-winded here, but yes, there was a little bit of a change once I got to CBS, but coaches, for the most part, I think they're willing to engage and to respond, provided timing is right and the reporter or reporters in question are if they're doing the job legitimately, then I see little reason why those kind of people can't be reachable.
So is there maybe one coach that is possibly over the top with promoting their school and trying to get out in front of as many media publications and outlets
over the
possible?
top in promoting? Good question. Who would that be? And it can not necessarily even like a negative. How about, let's see, what are some of the coaches who are some of the most available and wanting to kind of promote their schools? Bruce Pearl at Auburn.
That's so funny because that's the guy I had in my head.
Yeah,
I
Bruce
think he's
Pearl.
a great coach.
Yeah,
We've talked on a couple occasions, been prepping for games.
Yep.
But he's as good as they come, that I think, as far as promoting the Auburn brand.
Yeah, I'll give you a few. I'd say Bruce. I'd say Scott Drew at Baylor. I would say Eric Musselman at Arkansas. I would say, I want to give you one or two more here that are particularly good about kind of getting out there. Mike Bray at Notre Dame is pretty good. And then who's the number 5 coach I could give you here that's pretty good at it overall? There's a lot of good ones. I'm trying to find like a particular. I could give you Todd Golden at Florida, but he just got there. I did a whole deep dive.
That was a fascinating article. I've gotten to know Todd over the last few years when he was at USF, and I think he's going to do a great job at Florida. How did that article come about? Because if I remember correctly, you spent like 4 or 5 days in a July evaluation period traveling all over the country with them while they're figuring out recruiting, evaluating, going back to practices. How do you get that kind of access, and how'd that work?
Well, okay, so there are a couple of things that go into that. One, when we got to about mid-May, I'm starting to look ahead on the calendar, the summer stuff. What are we going to do every year when COVID isn't impacting it? I go on the road once or twice to these recruiting events where all the coaches are. Again, speaks to the sport and the coaches. Like that thing doesn't exist in the same way in any other major American sport. Yeah, I guess if you go to the Super Bowl and you're in media, you're going to see some head coaches there. There are other things, but we're talking about literally head coaches. Like you bump into them at the Starbucks, you're walking with them into the venue, you're sitting next to them literally for 2 to 4 hours, watching a couple of games, talking shop. It's a real beneficial way of getting story ideas, getting information on record, on background, off record. But I've done the go to Peach Jam, write about a prospect, write about this and that. And not to say I couldn't do it again this past year, but I was like, what's there something I could do that could be a little bit different here? So I looked at the new hires and I thought, well, maybe because a couple of years ago, I spent only one day with an unnamed mid-major coach at the Peach Jam, met him in the gym at like 8:05 a.m. and was with them until 10 o'clock at night. And I didn't identify that coach because that way the coach could speak on the record about guys he was recruiting and it really be like, be entertaining, informative, and it was good. And that was a fun little thing I did 3-4 years ago. But I was like, you know what, I want to do one with a power conference coach where I'm identifying who I'm with and do it for a 5-day period. So I looked at all the coaches that were hired and I thought, well, Golden's probably the best one because there's intrigue around him because of how young he is. He's getting the job at Florida, potential to be a top 10 program. Obviously, at one point it was. That's a top 25 job in the country objectively. So he's had a big job with a big following. Mike White left to go to Georgia, and I wanted to be able to have the ability to not just be in one place. So I figured Golden would be likely, since he was at Florida, to at least hop around the country so I could kind of take you onto the private team plane, show you what it's like to travel, like literally wake up one day and not know where you will be at 5 o'clock that afternoon. That's kind of the nature of power conference coaching and recruiting in July. And so I went to Golden with the idea. He was enthusiastic about it, just had to run up the flagpole. Florida officials thankfully cleared me to be on the private plane. That's certainly, man, oh man, it's just, it's kind of an obvious advantage, but once you're actually like living in it, you see how obvious it is, like how quickly you can get from one place to the other. Whereas plenty of power conference assistants, head coaches at smaller schools, if they're flying, they don't have that agility on a day-to-day basis. They're having to check in and do traditional air travel, sometimes have a layover. Like you still can get the job done, you can recruit, but when you're a head coach at one of these, 3 dozen programs that have access to a private jet, and you can do that in July, it just allows you to get to 4 or 5 more games, see 2 or 3 more recruits than some of the competition. And that can be a big time factor there. So I wanted to do something different, something I hadn't done before. And that wound up working out pretty well. We went from Chicago to Atlanta to Augusta. He actually went back to Gainesville to do a practice, an NCAA sanctioned practice, and work out in the middle of this, which was an unexpected twist, but that was a cool thing to experience as well. And it kind of encapsulated everything about how Golden is approaching recruiting at Florida. And obviously your audience is going to be familiar with him because of his background at San Francisco. And there's no telling how good he will or won't be. Like, I do think he'll probably work there. I think he's going to have a good run at Florida, but there are some skeptics, yes, in coaching circles that say, he's been good, but really look at the record that he had in league play. He's still pretty young, taking over a Florida job. There's a lot of pressure there. The SEC, the coaching there is pretty big. So I had a couple of coaches tell me, like, I will not be surprised if we look up at 4 years and Todd Golden is not at Florida anymore. But there are others that believe that he is going to be there for the long haul and it will really work. And, I wanted to get an inside look. Here he is, first summer season recruiting at UF. And that's what that piece was all about.
Well, I'm pulling for him because, like I said, I've gotten to know him a little bit. He might have the best shoe game of coaches in the WCC. He always would be wearing Jordans on the sideline. Did he vet your shoe choice to get on the plane?
That's a great question. He did not vet my shoe choice. His shoes never came up. I was with him for 5 days. His shoes never came up. My shoes never came up, but I was just wearing I think I was just wearing my black Sauconys that I run around in. Like they get the job done. And, But he did note that, and this wasn't intentional, but he was like, by day 3, I'd either had, because it's summer, so I'm wearing my Beach Boys Pet Sound shirt here too. I do tend to wear clothes that have a little pop to it. I like colors. The colors are there. Why not use them? So I'd either had a bright shirt or like red shorts one day. And he's like, man, everything you wear, like either your top or your bottom, it's got some sort of like real strong color to it. I was like, it's not always like this, Todd, but you happen to be right about that. So in terms of the sartorial aspect, he's definitely in tune with that. But I was naive to how deep his dresser drawer or closet is in terms of the Jordan look. I assume it's going to get even crazier once the season moves along. I did happen to notice, now that you mention it, he was wearing some pair. Like, I am not a shoe guy. Everyone's got that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if as we podcast here, you can see, like, I'm in my office, I've got drum set behind me, I've got guitars, I've got some guitar pedals, like that kind of stuff. Big time. It's called gear acquisition syndrome. If you're like a musician or want to be a musician, you get one pedal and you're like, I got to get another. Then I got to get another. So I get that from a shoe perspective.
Uh-huh.
But Dan, I've always been a guy like, I've got 3 pairs of shoes, and I will run in them or walk in them until they're no good. And then I'll get another. I don't need 6, let alone 60. But I understand that there are a lot of people out there that they need as many pairs of shoes as they do T-shirts. And I guess Golden's one of those guys.
Yeah, he's got the Jordan game down for sure. You grew up in the Northeast, so
Yes.
I would imagine you followed the Big East closely. When you look nationally perspective, what's the most underrated league going into this season?
Specifically, yeah. So I did grow up in the Northeast. My formative years in Vermont, and then I've been in Connecticut more than 2 decades now. But going into the season, the most underrated, that's a good question. Last season, if you go by Ken Palm, I'll read this to you real quick here. Big 12 was, not only was the Big 12 the best league, it was the best league in efficiency margin at Ken Palm by more than 4 points. And that's the second. The Big 12 basically versus the rest of the field was the second best conference in a given season versus the second place team in the past 20 years at Ken Palm. The ACC, I believe, had a year where it was even better. I want to say 10, 12 years ago. But I bring that up to say it's impossible to overrate the Big 12, I think. And that conference wouldn't quite qualify. The SEC was number 2 a season ago, the Big 10, then the Big East, then the ACC, the Pac-12, Mountain West, American, and then the West Coast. Going into this season, the league that's maybe the most undervalued, I'm tempted to say the Pac-12, only in this regard. The Pac-12 had 3 tournament teams a season ago. Arizona hit the 1 line, UCLA obviously 4, and then USC was 7. All 3 of those teams should be in the tournament mix again. Oregon, Washington State won 22 games. Like, can they break through? And Washington, I think, is going to take a big jump. And then Stanford is actually the team. I recently did a column where it was 68 days until the start of the season. So I did 68 things, storylines, yada, yada to know. And in that, I said the only team that I thought in the entire country with from a power conference with a tournament drought of at least 7 years or longer that I think would end that drought, I'm just going to take Stanford on a whim. So I think the Pac-12 kind of sneakily might be a league where we look up and it's got 5 or 6 bids in the tournament. So that might be the one where, because the Pac-12's had a rough offseason.
Yes, they have.
Just all across the board. It actually was handed a life raft with the college football playoff, and we're going to have 6 auto bids. So any idea of the Pac-12 and the Big 12 merging, or the Big 12 eating the Pac-12, that's now done. Why would you do that if you're the Big 12 or the Pac-12? Like, you're going to have an auto bid into the big football playoff there. So I think the Pac-12 was spared, and it's been a rough season, but I actually think it's got a chance. Finished 6th last season in terms of conference strength overall at Ken Palm. I think it's got a chance to be closer to what it was a year before that. People may not realize this. The Pac-12 rated as 3rd best conference. And then in the 2020 year, it was number 5. It's had some up and down years. It's been 6 or 7 more often than not, but I think I'd go with the Pac-12 there.
Awesome. I love that, because I call a lot of games on the Pac-12 network. I agree with you with Washington State. I think I called 10 of their games a season ago. They've shown steady improvement under Kyle Smith. So hopefully Coug fans can hold you to that, or say that, hey, Matt was correct and this was their year to break through. you recently released some great articles in regards to kind of polling coaches of who would be the best player coming into college basketball season, and you did it anonymously, where coaches gave you their true thoughts on things. Are those your most fun type of articles to put together? Because when you tell a coach something's going to be anonymous and they trust you, they give you their true spin that you can share. Or do you just like, finding a weekly column and then writing an article on what's catching your eye at the
I
moment?
love it all, to be honest. But those Candid Coach, so that's yeah, we're in the midst of our Candid Coaches series. Every August and now into September here, we run 8 to 10 questions about a variety of topics. In fact, as we record this, so tomorrow's episode will be, or poll question will be, should college go to 24 seconds or stick at the 30-second shot clock? So, be on the
Oh, that's
lookout for
going to
that.
be fascinating, because I've said for years they need to go to 24.
The vote was the responses on that one were great, and that's actually one where that didn't need to be anonymous. Like, no coach is going to be afraid to put their name to that 24 or 30. But best player, which Drew Timme won for a second consecutive season, although his margin wasn't as big last season. He was like 44% heading into the season. Turns out Oscar Tshiebwe won Player of the Year this year. He beat Tshiebwe, which I was surprised. I thought Tshiebwe was going to narrowly beat Timme, but as a lot of coaches explained to me, Timmy's more offensively dynamic. He's going to average more per game. Gonzaga should probably be in the 1 seed conversation. And so because of that, they're going to be ranked in the top 10 for the majority of the season. We just like Timme more, but Tshiebwe got a good healthy amount, and so did Armando Bacot. I love doing those poll questions because, one, I try and cycle in personally. Paris and I both interview about 100 coaches overall, but me, I like to bring in like 15 to 20 coaches each year that either have never done it. So we do head coaches and assistants. So they've either never done it, or I track, and we've done this for a decade now. So I literally track every year what coaches I interview. So I'm not asking the same coach 2 years in a row or the same coach 2 out of 3 years. Yeah. So it's either 15 to 20 of these guys haven't done it, period. Or they haven't done it in like 6 or 7 years. And what's funny is a couple of coaches will see the series go up and they'll be like, dude, where was my phone call? It's like, I'll cycle you back in 2024.
But that's gotta make you feel good that they remember an article that you're putting together and they like being included in it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And because sometimes there are topics that are like, man, I want in. Like, I want to tell you that we should go to a 24-second clock, or we should stay at 30 seconds and all that. So in the off season, when college basketball's news cycle can hit a couple of periods for 2-3 weeks, we're into the dregs, and that's fine. Like, there's actually something to be said about having a long off season. It gets the anticipation for an actual season, like, ramped up to really good volumes and hype levels, if you will. These kind of things help. But, once we get to the season, we actually have games, we have results, we have things to talk about. There's a coach or a player that has a compelling feature story that I want to write about, or to write about a column. Like, I do like it all, but yes, this particular exercise gives me an opportunity to basically reconnect with 60 to 70 coaches in the middle of the off season, when, frankly, and you know this, Dan, who these guys are on August 4th is not who they are on February 4th. Different human beings. I say that in almost a loving way. And they would admit it. Yeah. Like, and they're not that they can't be talked to. We talked to them in the middle of February too, but the stress levels are so reduced. Everyone loves their team. They like all their transfers. They're going to have a 10-man rotation, all this kind of stuff. So it's always good to catch up with them in the midst of their summers there. And then, they have more of a clear mind to answer a lot of those kind of poll questions.
So obviously you work closely with Gary Parrish. Is there one journalist maybe that, when you were coming up, you admired, you looked to their work and said, hey, I'd love to get a chance to work with that person? Or, it's really insightful when you read their work and it kind of spurs creativity on your end?
That's a good question. So coming up, I will say within college basketball, I would say I probably read Mike DeCourcy as much as anyone when I was like making that transition. I read everyone, though, to be honest. But when I was in college, like, that's when Andy Katz was doing a ton at ESPN.com. So I would read Andy all the time. Greg Doyle, way back in the day, like, ESPN's coverage used to be, it would have like 4 writers in different parts of the country. So Doyle would always cover, he was in North Carolina at the time, so he'd cover a lot of ACC and like Southeast part of the country there. So those were guys that I read a ton of. Dan Wetzel has been one of, if not my favorite sports writers for like basically like a dozen years there. But when I was younger and I would read Sports Illustrated and, Rick Riley was a big time. Gary Smith was huge. Grant Wall back in the day, I read everything, and Grant Wall eventually transitioned. He kind of transitioned to soccer as soon as I got into college basketball. I want to say Grant Wall's like last season covering college basketball was when Butler lost in the title game in 2010. I think he wrote the cover story for that game, and then he transitioned into soccer writing. But there are so many, and college basketball media for the most part is pretty. It's pretty great. Competitive, yes, but very cordial. You do have your gadflies, like your Jeff Goodmans. I say that lovingly. But can't help himself. What do we want? And he was good. Jeff Goodman was a big reason why, in helping me get to where I am. He took me under his wing when he was at Fox Sports. I also did freelancing for him. He'd be like, all right, Norlander, I need you to do this. And I'll cut you $100 check. And sure enough, 2 months later, I'd get that $100.
2 months later. I like it.
Hey,
last question before I let you go. I know you got probably articles that you got to get ready for a deadline. Give me your Final Four and who's going to win the national title this year.
You want my Final Four in the first week of September?
Everybody does, because here's the thing is I can hold you accountable for this come February, March, if we come across each other in CBS line of work, and vice versa. If I were to go, put out my Final Four and I'm completely off, somebody's going to make a comment to me.
Oh boy. I will almost definitely change this for official purposes when we have to publish it to cbssports.com in like 7 weeks. All right. Final Four. I will go. I'm not gonna pick Gonzaga. I'm gonna reverse jinx them. Let's see. I will go Houston. I'm feeling a weird Final Four this season. A lot of quality teams, but I'm feeling like a 1 seed, a 2 seed, a 3 seed, a 4 seed kind of get there. I'll go Houston. I will go. I'll go UCLA. I will go Arkansas, and give me Virginia. Virginia is like a 3 or 4 seed breaking through. So Houston, Virginia, UCLA, Arkansas. I got to give you a national champion. I'm not going to keep this. I'm just telling you. I'm sharing on the podcast right now. This is not going to be my pick. I'm just telling you. When I do this again, it's not going to be my. I have not thought about this.
So it's your early September pick, but it's not 100% on record.
I will go with Houston.
Your rough draft.
Houston is projected as the best of the 4 teams that I gave you. We did a candid coaches on that. Who's going to be the best team this season? Houston came in second ahead of the Zags. Carolina won that poll. Houston's going to, I think, have its best offense yet under Kelvin Sampson, and they should, again, be a top 10 defense. I do like the Cougs' chances. They obviously got close last season. Give me Houston, which would be incredible. We talk about how good Mark's done up in Spokane. Obviously, he has. But what Kelvin Sampson has done to a program that was, DOA when he took that job, and now they're like reliably in the Final Four conversation, have made it to a Final Four. It's insane. So for now, there's a chance I'll stick with that pick, but I don't know if I will. But for this podcast, I'll give you Houston.
Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate the time. I look forward to following the rest of the Candid Coaches articles that will be coming out. So thanks again, and maybe we'll see each other back in New York City at some point this season.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.